Hey, church family, I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we continue to pray for the outcome of this election. Now, despite the fact that the mainstream media continues to confirm Joe Biden as America's president-elect, you know what they're failing to tell us is that it was November the 13th, last Friday, when Congressman Jody Hice crafted an official letter in order to inform the General Services Administration that the government funds, which fall under the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, they're not yet available for Biden. Now, just to be clear, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 is designed to ensure a seamless transition from one president to the next. This support not only includes an office in the White House for the newly elected president and their vice president, but this also includes access to a little over $9 million for transition activities. And while it's the responsibility of the General Services Administration to provide this support, the administrator of the GSA is currently being encouraged to withhold this support from Biden and Harris, and for a few reasons. You see, according to the letter that our Congress recently sent to the administrator of the GSA, this assistance can only be offered after there is an apparent successful candidate for the office of the president and vice president. The ranking member of the Subcommittee on Government Operations went on to list three situations in which there may be an unapparent president-elect. And so I want to consider these three situations. This includes, first of all, an electoral tie, or also a plurality winner, or thirdly, the presence of extensive voter fraud or intimidation. Now, seeing how the Trump campaign is currently challenging the election results in 6 swing states, then we must wait for the results of these court cases before we can award the electoral votes from those states to either man. And as it stands right now, Biden has 227 electoral votes, and Trump has 232. Congressman Hice also, as he crafted this letter, reminded the administrator of the GSA about the precedent set by the Clinton administration in the contested 2000 election. You know, President Bill Clinton back then set this precedent, which is based on the idea that a candidate must concede the loss before there can be an apparent president-elect. And seeing how there is currently no concession on the part of President Trump, well, then there is no political basis for identifying Joe Biden as our current president-elect. Now, the chances are this is the first that you've heard of this official letter. Chances are, you haven't seen this letter brought up in the mainstream media. You haven't heard about this letter sent from the Congressional Subcommittee on Government Operations written to this administrator of the GSA, explaining why it's too soon for the General Services Administration to provide Biden's transition team with an office and a little over $9 million. And the reason why that this support isn't yet available to Biden is because he hasn't yet been officially recognized as the apparent president-elect. This title won't actually be official until all of the allegations of voter fraud are examined and then decided upon. And while I realize that the mainstream media is working overtime in order to assure us that Joe Biden is our president-elect because, there's no evidence of voter fraud, I would just remind you that these are the same media outlets who assured us for years that Trump was guilty of working together with the Russians in order to steal the 2016 election. For 2 years, they assured us that there was concrete evidence which would prove that Trump was guilty of collusion. And yet, at the end of the day, Robert Mueller's investigation provided no proof that Trump was guilty of collusion. Here's how Robert Mueller put it in his report. He declares, and I quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." Now remember, the mainstream media assured us for 2 years that there was evidence of that collusion. And yet, when all was said and done, after spending $32 million, all of the investigation revealed that there was no conspiracy, there was no coordination on the part of Trump and his campaign. Well, now the same media outlets who assured us that there was evidence of collusion on the part of Trump, this is the same group that's assuring us that there's no evidence of voter fraud this time. And at this point in time, I just can't help but to wonder, why do people still believe these media outlets? Why do we believe them? If they were willing to spread misinformation when they accused Trump of colluding with Russia, then what are the chances that they're also willing to spread misinformation as they assure us that there's no voter fraud during this election? Christian, listen, we can just sit back and watch the show as the courts engage in this investigation. And it's my guess that it's going to end up in the Supreme Court. It might end up, being passed over to Congress. But either way, let's just be patient and let's wait for our judicial system to do its job. If the elections are proven to be fair and if there is no widespread voter fraud, then listen, Biden's going to be our president. It's also possible that Trump's accusations might be proven. And if there is, in fact, widespread voter fraud, then he might also receive enough electoral votes to actually win. But listen, until this thing is decided, it's important for us to remember that the mainstream media doesn't have the right nor the power to determine the outcome of this election. And they certainly can't tell us what the conclusion of a court case is going to be by saying there's no voter fraud. Let's let the courts figure that out. Rather than blindly believing the claims made by the mainstream media, which have been proven to be false so many times over, I just encourage you to remember what King Solomon wrote in Proverbs chapter 18, where he declares, "The first to state his case seems right until his opponent begins to cross-examine him." Simply put, let's wait until all the evidence is in, and let's wait until all the evidence is examined before we rush to judgment. Listen, before we take a strong stand on either side of this argument, let's just wait to hear both sides of the argument. Let's consider the facts, as they're presented. And that way we can embrace a point of view that's based on something that's more substantial than the political propaganda that is oftentimes presented by both sides. With this as the goal, let's just continue to pray for the outcome of this election, and let's pray that the Lord will raise up the right leaders according to his perfect plan. And as always, I encourage every Christian, let's continue fighting the good fight of faith, all for the glory of God.